We're going to kick off with insights from Matthew Adams, Head of Natural Resources and Climate Strategy at Hounslow Council, as well as Shehzad Ahmed, Regeneration Project Manager, on Harrow Council's approach to the climate emergency and supporting businesses in this transition, and we may put a few questions straight back to Matthew and Shehzad after their intro. Then we will hear from Jessica Lobo of the UN Global Compact Network UK, who will put the climate emergency and climate action in the context of the wider United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Jessica will also introduce the Race to Zero campaign, which is of course a global campaign that we are raising the profile of and supporting here in West London, and she will also give you a flavour of what COP26 has in store and its implications for all of us. We're then going to get into the practical and get a business perspective from Rupin at SwissPac, and then you'll be hearing from my colleague Jane, who will introduce the Race to Zero West London toolkit, and then hand over to Martina at Climax Community, who've developed the Climate Essentials tool to support businesses in baseline assessing your carbon footprint and then figuring out what your next steps look like towards zero. And then, of course, we'll open up for any questions that you may have for the panel, or indeed questions that the panel will have for each other. So that's the plan. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to welcome both Matthew and Shehzad to set the scene from a Harrow Council perspective.
Thanks very much, Andrew, and a very warm welcome to West London Business. Thank you for hosting this session. I'm quite excited about it. I think it'll be quite a useful session. I'm looking forward to learning lots myself. We just thought it'd be useful just to set a little bit of the Harrow context and tell you a little bit about what Harrow as an organisation is doing around emissions reduction. Because we are an organisation in many ways not unlike businesses. We buy and sell, we buy goods and services. We have an estate, we have vehicles, so all similar things to a lot of businesses. And we've been grappling with this over the last year or two, thinking about how we can reduce emissions. And I thought it might be useful just to share a little bit around that. If you just wait 1 second while I share my screen. Let's have a look. That should now share. Can I just check you can see that?
We can see that, and if you go full screen, it will then fill the whole space for us.
Yeah, let's have a look. Is that better?
Yeah, slideshow, yeah, from beginning. Away you go.
Hopefully that's now on. Okay, so if I just go back to the first slide, excuse me a second. It seems to have frozen.
It's having a good think at the moment.
There we go.
Brilliant.
I think we're there now. Okay, so and as Andrew mentioned, many local authorities in London, and Harrow's no exception, we've declared a climate emergency. And like a lot of our West London colleagues in Ealing and Brent and Hounslow, we've got an aim to work towards carbon neutrality by 2030 as an organisation, which is a steep ask, but I think it's one of the sort of accepted standards now that in order to really start to make inroads, public bodies in particular should start in, local authorities should start to take a lead on this and move faster perhaps than the national and the government's declared net zero target of 2050. So we started to unpack what this meant for Harrow as an organisation, and the starting point was to measure our emissions. I'm sure we'll hear more about that later in the session, about practical tools of doing that. And it sort of falls into four main categories for us. We've obviously got our buildings. We've got a lot of estates in Harrow, schools, community buildings, quite a lot of housing as well. And for the buildings where we pay the bills, as it were, where we're responsible for utilities, around 9,000 tonnes of CO2 a year, and that's half of our total for those first three categories of buildings, fleet, and electricity. Is attributable to buildings. It's mainly our gas heating requirements. So there's clearly something we need to do there about reducing the energy use of our buildings and converting the heating source away from fossil fuels. Of the 18,000, about 2,000 relates to our fleet. We've got over 300 vehicles in Harrow Council, and the majority of them still run on diesel, but we're starting to sort of begin that transition away from diesel. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And the other big part of our emissions profile is our electricity use. So like all organisations, we use electricity, and it's not green yet across the country. The grid isn't quite green. There's still a lot of gas. I think it's gas turbines now in particular produce some of our electricity rather than coal. So our electricity usage has a carbon footprint associated with it, and for our corporate buildings and our schools, etc., that's around 7,000 tonnes a year. And the fourth category, which we don't have a figure for yet, but which is important, is the emissions that are in our supply chain. So like all business organisations, we buy a lot of services, a lot of goods, and all of those services and goods have emissions associated with them. The production of the whatever it is we're buying, whether it's computer equipment or we're ordering services from abroad, all of those goods and services have embodied carbon in them. So the carbon that was taken to produce the goods and manufacture it and transport it to us as end user. And we don't know what that is, but I'm sure maybe we'll get into this later in the session. I think most people understand that to be a very significant part of most businesses' footprint. There was a study a couple of years ago by the Carbon Disclosure Project. I think they had about 5,000 organisations respond, and it suggested that their supply chain emissions were around 5 times greater than their so-called scope 1 and scope 2 emissions to their buildings and their fleet and electricity. So how we procure goods and services is definitely a focus that we want to look at in Harrow. That's a ton of CO2. For those of you who haven't seen that picture before, I quite like that. It does sort of, it's quite chastening when you think, just for us as organisations, 18,000 of those huge balloons hanging over us every year, and that's just, as I said, just Harrow, and we're quite a relatively small part of the borough's emissions as a whole. So what are we doing about it? Well, in our buildings, this year, quite exciting. For the first time, we're putting 6 big heat pump installations in. Heat pumps, for those who don't know, are basically a way of electrifying heat in a much more efficient way than gas boilers. And we're finding a way with this technology. It has its sort of complications, but we're making a start and skilling up as we go along. In fleet terms, we replaced all of our fleet in 2019 with Euro 6 compliant diesel vehicles, and a small number, but we made a start with 16 electric small vans. And the reason we didn't go further with that is that the big vehicles that we use, particularly as an organisation, the heavy vehicles, they either weren't available or were extremely expensive in electric versions. But that's definitely something we need to focus on over the next 5-10 year period. How do we progressively start to electrify our fleet? And I think a lot of businesses and organisations are looking at this, and hopefully that will create the demand to push prices down for the sort of heavier vehicles that we need. On the electricity side, we've had a push over recent years to install big solar arrays on school buildings. They're very good for it. They've got big flat roofs often, and they can generate quite a significant amount of electricity locally and obviously renewably, rather than using it from the grid. And in October last year, we moved actually all of our electricity supplies for school buildings and for corporate buildings to a green electricity tariff, which actually didn't cost us very much more than a sort of non-green tariff. And it's certainly something as a good first step that all businesses and indeed residents can consider doing. And then in our last area, the supply chain, towards the end of last year, we've started now asking questions of our suppliers in procurement. It's quite an open question. We're just saying, We've got a target for 2030. What are you doing if we're buying goods and services from you to reduce your emissions as a business, and how in the contract we're going to have with you are you going to demonstrate that you're reducing emissions? So quite an open question, and we're getting a variety of responses back. Some of them very surprising. People are really, the business community is really doing a lot in this area, and obviously some people who that's the first time they've seen that question, and they're just getting to grips with it. But this is very much the beginning of a dialogue, and I think it's a really positive one with supply chains about how we can work together to reduce emissions. And then the last point at the bottom there, really, which is sort of where you come in Harrow, is our emissions as an organisation, although they're significant, are still only about, we think, less than 3% of the boroughs as a whole. So residents and businesses, and in Harrow we have this really, quite unique in London, a very small business focused community. You can all play a really big part in doing, with the skills and knowledge that hopefully this session will help us all to sort of skill up on. You can play your part to help reduce those emissions. It does really require a team effort, because no one organisation in the borough has the the ability to drive a massive reduction in the borough's emissions. Everybody needs to play a part in it. So that probably quite neatly hands over to Shehzad, who's got a slide, I think, just to talk about an initiative we're going to be running in Harrow for local businesses over the next year. I'll stop sharing there, Shehzad, and hopefully you can pick up.
That's great. Cheers. Thank you very much for that, Matthew. Hi everyone, my name is Shehzad Ahmed, and I'm part of Harrow Council's Economic Development Team, and I'm the Programme Manager for High Streets and Business Support as well. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yes, Shehzad.
Yes, and if you click full screen, that'd be great. I think it's down next to the magnifier down the sort of bottom right of your screen. There's a full screen option.
So this one here?
But down towards the bottom of the screen. Right down at the bottom of your screen, you've got the zoom function, and then there's a presentation screen just next to the zoom that takes you full screen. Fantastic.
Excellent, superb, great, good, superb. So in terms of business support, there's 4 projects on the go at the moment. One is providing generic business support, so it's doing a diagnostic check and then supporting businesses. The second project that we've got is assisting businesses to trade online, so improving their online presence, or if they don't have an online presence, to be able to get online. And the third project is supporting businesses to be able to be ready to tender for public sector contracts. And the fourth one, linked to today, is a project that we're terming Repair, Reuse and Upcycle. And it's a new project, it's a 1-year project, and we've commissioned Groundwork West London to deliver this project for us. And essentially it has 2 main strands. So the first strand is an online directory. And the online directory seeks to do exactly that. It seeks to capture details of businesses, social enterprises and community groups that are in the business of repair, reuse and upcycle, and essentially for the directory to become self-managing. And the aim of that directory is essentially for businesses to raise awareness, and it all links back to the circular economy and the aims that Matthew was speaking about early on as well in terms of carbon reduction. The second strand, also to entice people into the directory and to also promote best practice as well, is to run a competition that enables businesses, social enterprises and social groups to be able to deliver initiatives that come out as winners of the competition. So as part of the competition, there's a total of 15,000, 3 winners, and each winner receives £5,000 that they can go on to implement the idea. So in terms of the outputs and outcomes, so it's the one comprehensive directory, the competition with the 3 winners, and for the directory to be self-managing and self-sustaining. And essentially the wider aims it's to raise awareness, so everyone in Harrow to know where they can go to donate unwanted goods. It's for the directory to target a diverse range of users, and essentially encouraging as many stakeholders as possible that are within the business of reuse, recycle, upcycle to feature and be a part of that directory. So it's a fairly new initiative at the moment. The project's at the marketing stage. We'll shortly be launching a survey to enable stakeholder groups to submit the information that will be uploaded into the directory as well. So if there's any businesses that you know of or familiar with or yourself would like to be a part of that, please do share your contact details, and we'll circulate the contact details towards the end of the meeting, and I'll also put my email address in the chat as well. So in addition to this project, the Harrow Council will also run a business forum, and we also have a business newsletter as well. So equally, if anyone's interested in being part of that, please do drop me a message in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you both for giving us that sort of fantastic overview of the breadth of work that's now underway at the local authority as we sort of get our teeth stuck into this agenda. Very ambitious, like lots of our local authorities, which is great to see. One sort of question I'm sort of keen to pick up with you, Matthew. You mentioned your sort of heat pump project, and I sensed it was quite a tough project to actually implement in practice. Obviously, lots of others may be up against those same challenges soon. What are your lessons learned thus far?
Well, it's not a new technology in the sense that it's been around for a while, but I think doing it at scale. So we're trying to put them into schools, for example, at the moment. I've got two schools that we're piloting it. It throws up some issues around. So, for example, power supply. If you've got a big commercial building, you're suddenly using a lot more. You're going with gas, which is great, but you're using a lot more electricity. So you need to think about your power supplies. And then we haven't quite gotten to the implementation stage yet, but I think there is a different way of managing these as buildings as well. So some of you may have but we know people with domestic heat pumps, and it's a different way of managing your heat. You can't just switch it on and off like a gas boiler. You have a longer term sort of burn where you heat the building up earlier and it stays warm. So it's a learning experience. I think it's definitely the technology that's available now. I mean, in the energy world, you hear a lot about hydrogen, and I'm sure we've all heard that. And in principle, yes, hydrogen's a great technology, but the infrastructure that's required to deliver it just isn't there at the moment, and is unlikely to be in the sort of 5-year periods that we're talking about. So if we want to start to reduce gas heating, heat pumps at the moment are the preferred technology. We're also trying, just to mention, some ground source ones, which is a bit different, where you dig a big borehole and use the latent heat in the earth to sort of heat your buildings. And we're doing that in some social housing blocks, some sheltered housing blocks. So that's going to be a really exciting project. And
any senses yet whether that's relatively easier going down the ground source route, or just a different set of challenges? I
think it's more efficient, so it's definitely the sort of the better way, but it is more intensive because you have to dig big holes. So it's probably more suitable for bigger, if you're a business, for bigger businesses, or perhaps when you're developing a new building, because you can do that sort of big infrastructure work as you're developing it.
Quite a hard retrofit.
Yeah, it's relatively hard to retrofit. Yeah, so I think air source heat pumps for a lot of smaller businesses, and certainly for residents, is probably where the market's heading at the moment.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that additional insight. Not something we've yet had a chance to talk about on the roadshow. So interesting, sort of different line of inquiry. Without further ado, I'm going to keep us moving, and I'm going to welcome to the stage Jessica Lobo from the UN Global Compact Network UK. As I said, Jessica is going to give us a bit of an overview of the Sustainable Development Goals, how that connects in with climate action, the race to zero, and finally COP26. A long list of ground we've asked you to cover, Jessica. So over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. And thanks for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Jessica, and I work at the UN Global Compact Network UK. And my role there really is to support businesses to drive sustainability and create the world that we want. So really delighted to join you all to talk about this agenda. So a little bit about us first. We're the UN Global Compact, which is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. We have over 13,000 companies all over the world who have made the commitment to our 10 principles to support sustainability. And these universal principles are derived from UN treaties in those 4 areas that you can see on the screen, so human rights, labour, environment and anti-corruption. So I work in the UK network, and our role is to support all of the UK-based members to operationalise those 10 principles, to report annually on their progress, and to support the wider UN development agenda. And at the moment, the wider UN development agenda is best represented by the Sustainable Development Goals. So what are they? We may hear them being called the SDGs or the Global Goals. These were passed in 2015 and outlined 17 goals for the world to achieve by 2030. So you can think of it really as the world's to-do list. The goals are really closely interlinked, but together they'll bring about the future that we want. So fighting inequalities, tackling climate change, and creating a better world. And you can see there that they're really diverse in what they're trying to achieve. So you've got some environmental ones like protecting life below water or taking climate action. Some social ones there like eliminating poverty or achieving gender equality. And also some economic ones there, like looking at decent work and economic growth. So beneath these 17 goals sit 169 targets and 232 indicators so that we can measure our progress against them. And this 2030 agenda was agreed by all UN member states, so the goals apply to all countries. And it was agreed after one of the largest consultations ever undertaken by the UN. So I think there was literally tens of thousands of stakeholders who were involved. So I guess the real crux of this agenda is that while it was governments that made the commitment, it's going to achieve, it's going to need all members of society to achieve this, and in particular, the business community. Next slide, please. The problem is that after 5 years, the world has not been delivering on progress towards the goals at the pace or scale that is needed. And there's a couple of scary stats there on the screen of what it's looking like at the moment. And we're now seeing the impacts of COVID-19 intertwined with these long-standing social and economic inequalities. And there's a real missed opportunity that if we had not been working, well, if we had been working on this agenda before the pandemic, we would have been better equipped to deal with it. So we'd have been working on this agenda, we would have had better protections in the informal economy, more universal access to healthcare, more inclusive and sustainable societies, more resilient businesses. Next slide, please. I think the good news is that we're seeing a lot of business engagement across this whole Sustainable Development Goal agenda. But there's a big but. There is a critical performance gap between the action that businesses are taking right now and the global and societal needs that are defined by the SDGs. So this is globally, only 39% of companies have got targets that they believe are sufficiently ambitious or science-based. So that means, for example, a business may be setting targets to reduce their carbon emissions, but those targets themselves, or the action that they're aiming to achieve, is not sufficient enough to limit global temperatures to that safe amount. So that's the global picture. Let's go on to the next slide and we can have a look at what's happening nationally and locally. Specifically in the UK, we have a lot of work to do. So on the left-hand side of the screen is a study that was conducted in 2018, which looked at, of the 143 targets which are relevant to the UK, we were only making good progress on 24% of those. And the UK government is working on this agenda. And so in 2019, you can see that report in the middle there. That's the Voluntary National Review, in which they took an in-depth look at each SDG and outlined the next steps that we need to be doing to be able to achieve them. And there are some more recent figures on the ONS website of how we're now performing against each of those goals. So now with this mandate from national government, local governments are starting to work on this too. And London released a report just this year looking at how the city is contributing to the goals, and also 5 key recommendations for how we can advance them. And I think critically built into those recommendations is this urgent need to use the Sustainable Development Goal agenda to help us build back better and recover stronger from the pandemic. And of course, business is going to be such a huge part in London delivering this. So, I mean, we know that London needs business, but let's look at the other side. You know, why should business actually kind of engage in this and benefit from it? Well, there's a huge financial opportunity in supporting the goals. There was a robust analysis done shortly after the goals were passed, and it looked at just a few of the key sectors that would be impacted. And it found that there was a potential for $12 trillion of new business value every year by engaging with this agenda. So huge financial benefit. My first bullet points on the slide are looking at the macro level. So things that this agenda is seeking to achieve, you know, better educated and more productive workforce, economic and political stability, more fair and just societies, you know, these things are all good for business. Looking at the micro level, really helping to drive forward this agenda makes a business more attractive, not just for investors, but for customers as well, who are starting to expect and demand that businesses demonstrate a purpose beyond profit. It improves management of the supply chain and can help you save money and resources, builds trust and accountability, and also helps you share this global language. So, you know, there's a good chance that you're already taking steps towards helping to deliver some of those sustainable development goals. So actually by recognizing that and communicating on that, you're sharing this global language so that your investors can easily see what you are actually doing to drive this forward agenda. And same as your customers and the people that are going to be applying to work for your organization. I suppose lastly, going back to COVID-19, I mentioned that real missed opportunity in not making more progress towards the goals and how we would have been left better prepared for the pandemic. And that applies to businesses too. You know, aligning your strategies with the SDGs is the best way that you can create a resilient, strong and sustainable business. So there are a number of free tools and resources to understand the SDGs better and help you understand how you can align with them and communicate with them and explore your own impacts. And if you're interested, then visit our website. We've got loads of tools on, loads of free tools on there, and I can put the link in chat later if anyone's interested. Today, though, we're just focusing on one of the goals. So we're looking at SDG 13, climate action. So let's take a look at why we're looking at this goal in particular. Climate action essentially is one of the SDGs where businesses of any size can have the biggest impact. And I'm not just talking about having the biggest impact on the environment and society, but also having the biggest impact on your business. So it's all about future-proofing your business and reaping the benefits for yourself too. You know, businesses that look to use and manage resources more efficiently can tangibly reduce their operating costs and increase profitability. And I've got a note there on the slide about future-proofing your business and getting ahead of the changes. You know, government has set targets for the UK to transition to net zero. And that means that we've got a lot of changes that are going to be coming up in the next few years. So an example of that, by 2030, you won't be able to buy new petrol and diesel cars and vans in the UK. So if you're looking to either buy purchase vehicles or increase or change your fleet, by understanding that these changes are coming ahead, by getting ahead of this agenda and making that switch to zero emission vehicles means that you're going to be reducing some of the costs that are going to be coming further down the line and actually being able to help future-proof your business. And investors are looking at how you do this. They're looking at how you manage those business risks. They're looking at what you're going to be doing to manage disruptions and changes in the supply chain, changes in the legislation, But they're also looking at how you're responding to the shift in demand. And I mentioned this earlier, specifically with climate action, we're seeing a huge uptake from the public and engaging with this agenda. You know, we had climate strikes, really popular a few years ago. Lots of people demanding that their cities or even their organizations declare a climate emergency. And these are your customers, you know, they're not just your investors, but they're your customers who are going to be seeing the same, making the same demands on the businesses that they support. And I guess the reason this is particularly high on our agenda at the moment is because later this year, the UK is going to be hosting the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. Next slide, please. So in essence, it's going to be taking place in November, and world leaders are going to be coming to Glasgow to set ambitious targets for reducing emissions. And the UK is looking to really take a leading role in those conversations, which means that the government is going to be looking at business to take a leading role in reducing emissions. So government is expecting you to do it and looking for you to take that leading role, and there's going to be incentives coming your way. The public and your customers are going to be expecting you to do this. Likely your competitors are already going to be acting on this. So lots of reasons to engage with this agenda. I think by the very act of being here, you've made that first step in actually wanting to understand what this agenda is, what you can do about it, and how you can then lead the way. So I guess the big question, what can you do? Next slide, please. So the Race to Zero campaign is all about getting your emissions down to net zero, which means that you're not putting any more emissions into the atmosphere than you're taking out. And the UK government is putting a lot of resources into this. So on the left is a screenshot of the government's SME Climate Hub, which is full of resources and ideas and guidance to help you cut down your emissions. So just by taking that first step to make your own climate commitment will then open the door to all of these tools and incentives, and that can then help you meet that. And I think it's either Barney or Jane who's going to be talking a little bit more about this when they introduce the West London Business Race to Zero Toolkit. Also should mention that the UN Global Compact Network UK is going to be partnering up with the government to host a 1-hour webinar to take a deep dive into COP26 and what it's all about, explore some of those terms a little bit more, like I've mentioned, so things like net zero, and also some of these practical steps. I just want to, for my final slide, return to this broader sustainability agenda and take a look at where climate action fits within it. The truth is, we can't achieve any of the other goals that protect the environment or reduce inequalities or lift people out of poverty if we don't take urgent action on the climate. And I've got some animation on this slide, which will white out, I guess, some of the goals. And the ones that are left here on the screen, there's the SDGs, which business can have a direct positive impact on just by taking action on SDG 13 on climate action. So by looking at your supply chain to reduce your emissions, you're impacting goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production. By encouraging your staff to take active transport to work, that's contributing towards goal 3, good health and well-being. Looking at renewable energy, that's goal 7. Working with your local council on some of their plans and initiative, goal 11. Offsetting carbon that you can't reduce goes towards goal 15, and so on. So a really big impact that you can have on this agenda, and that's of course just at the direct level. If you then consider the knock-on impacts globally, you can consider how taking climate action will impact all of these goals that we're then trying to achieve. So I hope that set the scene a bit. I think I'm now going to hand over back to Andrew and the rest of the speakers who are going to dive into the practical action that you can take to deliver this agenda.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jessica, and a good sort of reminder of the importance of the UK sort of hosting COP26, which of course was meant to happen last year and has now been delayed as a result of the pandemic. But I think everyone seems pretty determined it will go ahead this autumn. Even if it has to be online, it will happen. And then at the end, of course, putting a spotlight on the interconnectedness of the SDGs, and that whilst we might take our starting point as being climate action, actually through that kind of doorway, we're then having lots of positive impacts on other elements of the SDGs, and they're all interdependent. So a great overview, lots of food for thought there. But as you said, Jessica, we're going to deep dive into the nitty-gritty detail now, and we're going to hear from a business guest. We've got Rupin Rughani from Swisspack with us to tell us a bit about their story, which is new to me. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing your reflections, Rupin.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. We are part of Swisspack Europe, and we are manufacturers and suppliers of flexible packaging. So we attract a lot of attention from plastic bashers, but our main aim is to focus on the hero that we are trying to protect is the food. And with customer preferences, with easier access to recycling facilities, etc., things are certainly improving and moving in the right direction when it comes to sustainability. But the challenges still remain that we manufacture a few thousand miles away in various sites across Asia and Europe, and there are challenges how to reduce the footprint. But what flexible packaging has done is improve the life of the food that is being packaged and reduce wastage. So although there is a win on one side, there is a slight difficulty on the other side, which is compounded by the fact that flexible packaging is not effectively recycled. The authorities and the other bodies are just literally starting to wake up to the reality that this is also a stream that needs to be managed better. So I can only look, I've worked in the waste industry for over 12 years now, and I can relate to this situation which we have now with flexible packaging. We had back in 2007 with food waste, where everybody just joined hands and said, we want to divert food waste from landfill, and we do whatever it takes. And as we stand right now, a decade later, we are looking at around 50% of our food waste being treated and diverted away from landfill. So whilst there is challenges remain, I'm quite confident that everybody will pull their weight to bring about this flexible packaging recycling revolution so that we can repurpose everything. And now with more information available, now more... It's upstairs. Sorry, I had a parking emergency.
That's right. Much more exciting. It's a live business environment that we're tuned into with you, Rupin.
Yes. So apologies for the disruption. So as it stands, only 10 to 15% of local authorities include flexible packaging in their curbside collections. Now, if you go to an average supermarket shelf, you cannot run away from flexible packaging. And you can also not run away from the fact that flexible packaging actually protects the contents much better than anything else. We've even done comparisons of using paper, other things. But again, it is not and the recyclability is also amazing. It's just that we don't have the tools and the means to manage it that well. So a lot of action is being taken. We in fact have started working with a UK-based specialist recycler who used a unique technology, which is again carbon neutral. You don't use any external energy to recycle all sorts of plastics, whether it's complex or recyclable. So those things are also coming up. They are about to double their capacity. Then you have people like Loop, TerraCycle. They are doing their own bits to try and gather as much flexible packaging as possible from people so that it doesn't go to landfill. So I think it's still early stages, but I think within a year we will have some concerted efforts from everybody involved. That's where we want to be able to provide that expertise of what material is what and where it can go, what is the best way to handle it, give that information to the people who handle it post use, and then make sure that it's effectively repurposed, recycled, and doesn't end up in landfill sites, just like we have the situation with food waste back then.
Really fascinating scene setting. I should have said in my intro, of course, Rupin, that you are one of the 12 elite companies that have successfully got a place on our Better Futures Plus program, which Jane is going to say more about shortly.
I know. I had that on my list of points, but I went blabbering on about what I'm passionate about. So apologies for that.
Well, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your experience of Better Futures Plus so far, and some of the areas that's making you think about as you look at how the business develops moving forward?
Certainly. So my association with started with RE London because I have worked extensively in my previous role with LWAB. And that's how I came across this Better Futures program. And then I spoke to a colleague that we should be part of it. And fortunately, we got selected for it. And it has been an absolute honor to be on there, to be able to week in, week out, talk to people, specialists on the panel who come in, give their own insights on how they have done things that are needed. Because it is an emergency, we all understand. But sometimes there is a lot of misconception, myths around a lot of things that makes us tentative. So what this program has helped us do is look at in the right direction and get the right help so that we can achieve what we want to. Everybody wants to achieve everything, but sometimes we are just looking in the wrong direction. So West London Better Futures program has given us that sort of direction of where to look, who to talk to, and sort of work towards your targets. So the biggest takeaway is we learned from the program, various interactions with the consultants. We are talking to other businesses. What gets measured gets dealt with. So that's, and today we have an important first step in our carbon footprint and LCA work, meeting with one of the consultants who have been introduced to us by Better Futures program. We have our first sort of catch-up meeting on an action plan.
Brilliant. And do you have any hunch at the moment? I mean, it may be too early to ask what the hardest area is going to be for you over the next 10 years and getting to net zero?
I have jotted down. It's this area of manufacturing abroad. We manufacture in 3 sites: one in India, one in China, and one in Lithuania. Now, bringing things in and everybody work, because it has been sort of become a bigger problem because of the pandemic also. Everybody wants just in time, just enough. Nobody wants to stock up. Everybody wants it yesterday. So all those challenges sort of, how much you work on your carbon footprint side on other aspects, but when you ship it by air, it's basically, it washes off every other bit of detail you worked on. So because we are driven by your customers' demands, needs, timelines, that area, I don't think we can eliminate, but we are starting to think on the offsetting lines. Yeah. Because transportation cannot be replaced by carbon neutral, especially international transportation.
Interesting.
That is what we are reliant on. Musk putting up an electric ship or a hydrogen ship, which is not going to happen in the here and now or next 5 years, which is our target. So we are looking at reducing, yes, where we can, but mixing it with some offsetting as well, and pushing our customers in direction of recycling this end of life, and working with authorities as well as waste management companies, engaging with them so that they are also up to scratch on that front. So that is
fantastic.
a
No,
few strategies in mind.
Now that's a fantastic overview, and actually it reminds me how at West London Business we've gone through the same journey ourselves earlier this year of calculating our footprints. We discovered that Scope 3 was our big problem area, and 170 tons a year is what we're grappling with in our sort of Scope 3 sort of supply chain. For us, a lot of our footprint kind of pre-pandemic was around events and all the food consumption and travel that's involved in that. So we've had to think carefully about offsetting, and have started to invest more in making sure that we are offsetting those 170 tons. Let's hold that thought, because I think we may in the discussion later sort of raise that with our panel, because it's, when you do decide to start offsetting, you're then confronted with the challenge of how do you offset and who do you buy those offsets from? So we'll hold that problem or challenge, depending on how you look at it, as we turn now to Jane from the Better Futures programme to tell us more about Race to Zero West London. So over to you, Jane.
Hi, thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you so much, Rupin, for telling us all about the complexities in your business. It's so interesting to hear how it's such a concerted effort by so many different actors to solve these climate issues. There's also so much happening in this space, and it's really great to hear of the different types of support for a green recovery at local, national and international level. We still have a long way to go, and the stakes are high, which is why we are campaigning for a race to zero at West London Business to build momentum towards a decarbonised economy ahead of COP26, where governments must strengthen their contributions to the Paris Agreement. We work with the West London boroughs, as we heard this morning, and also the business community and a range of strategic partners to strengthen the West London supply chain and make it as sustainable and climate resilient as possible, with the knock-on effects described by Jessica earlier. SMEs are the lifeblood of the economy, with over 1 million SMEs in London. And now more than ever, it's imperative that we support these, such as Swisspac, as we look to recover from the impacts of COVID-19. Here is a snapshot on the screen of some of the programs that we're working on. Starting in the top right is the London West Innovation District, which is to become the Silicon Valley of aviation, a creative hub and testbed for Jet Zero aviation sector-specific innovations. So a very exciting space there to try and tackle all the climate issues in aviation. We are supporting innovation in clean tech with the Better Futures program, and that involves helping small and medium-sized businesses in clean tech to grow and flourish. And from that program, which is really successful, came the Better Futures Plus program, which is what Rupin talked about earlier. And we're helping 12 small and medium businesses in London to make their plan to reach net zero by 2030. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Throughout all of the programs that we work on, we develop case studies to inspire other businesses to act. And that brings me on to Race to Zero. Next slide, please. Thanks. Achieving net zero is becoming recognised as a primary goal of climate change mitigation at a global level. In 2019, the UK became the first major economy to legislate and commit to achieve net zero by 2050. Hooray, the UK. And this will inform the future direction of government policy over the coming decades and has major implications for business. Working with our partners, our mission is to use our sustainability programs to inspire local action across West London. And we are encouraging all businesses, no matter what size, to make a commitment and start taking practical steps to reduce their emissions. Setting sustainability targets can seem daunting, but I'd like to reiterate that it will bring significant commercial benefits and future-proof your business in the long term. So how do you do it? First, you need to measure your impact. As Rupin so rightly said before, measuring your footprint will identify hotspots across your business, and within your supply chain to focus on as a priority, and will help you make better informed decision. On our Race to Zero page, there are links to free workshops from the UN Global Compact, which Jessica mentioned earlier, that will help you get started. And we can send you a basic carbon footprint calculator, but we will hear shortly from Martina, who is going to talk you through their super easy to use calculation tool called Climate Essentials. The next step, you need to make a plan to reach net zero. Our sustainability tool guide, which I think we're going to switch to now, is jam-packed full of resources to help you plan your strategy. There is information on wider policy guidelines and also sector-specific tools so you can track and reduce your emissions at a business level or a product, project and materials level using product lifecycle analysis tools. There are also tools that incorporate the social factors, which are really important to help you understand how that generates value in your business and also in your local and international communities. I'd like to use the built environment as an example of a sector that we have resources and tools in to help you assess your performance of your buildings. Just to throw in a stat for you, the operation of buildings such as lighting, heating and cooling systems represents around 40% of energy use in developed countries. So just tackling that energy use alone will make a huge impact. We also have links to, if we pop back to the previous slide, to directories of the clean tech businesses in the Better Futures program and circular products and services through ReLondon, which Rupin also mentioned earlier, which is part of LWARB. So if you're looking for inspiration or for green materials, products or services, or just interesting businesses in this space, we encourage you to take a look. And again, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, there is a directory of sustainability consultancies and sector-specific consultants that can help you with your strategy and help you reach net zero. Finally, make a commitment and let us know about it. The link to our website is on the bottom of that slide. We will promote you on our Race to Zero page and add you to our map. Next slide, please. I have some great news, and that's businesses that make up over a half of global GDP have committed or are in the process of setting a net zero target. So we're making progress. This is an interactive map of businesses in West London that have made a commitment, and we'd absolutely love to add you to our map. So how do you set a target? There are different routes you can go down as a business. The Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, called BIS, is encouraging all SMEs in London to make commitments. You can do this by completing a short form on the SME Climate Hub, which Jessica mentioned before. It's free and there are lots of incentives and benefits along the way. They'll help you out. You can also sign up to the Science Based Targets Initiative and join over 1,000 businesses around the world already committed. Science-based targets will help you measure your impact using globally recognized tools and help you set milestones to reach net zero. Both of these initiatives are aligned with the Paris agreements to halve global emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050, which will limit global warming to 1.50 degrees Celsius. To sign up, you need to commit to these two things, which is halve your greenhouse gas emissions and achieve net zero by 2050. And you need to disclose your progress on a yearly basis. There are plenty of free and paid for initiatives out there, and we've listed quite a lot of them in our tools guide. Pick the one that works best for your business and sector, get involved with your borough and let us know about it. We absolutely love to hear about the great work that businesses are doing in this space. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Better Futures now. We are working with delivery partners at Imperial College, Imperial Consultants, GLA and Sustainable Ventures, and we're supporting London's clean tech businesses to make London a beacon for clean tech innovation. The that come about from Better Futures are crucial to advancing the green agenda and inspiring other businesses to act. A few examples on this slide Megway is a West London business that has designed a sustainable transport solution, and they move goods underground in small pipes. And this addresses the explosive growth in online shopping that Rupin was talking about earlier. It's called Hyperloop technology, and they use electromagnetic motor systems for underground e-commerce. So very cool. Another example is Biome, and they grow mycelium, which is a mushroom, or many different types of mushrooms, and they eat the food and agricultural waste that we produce to grow quality, very low emission building materials. So a good one for the built environment. And then you can feed these building materials back to the mycelium at end of life, and it's a completely circular solution. So they're just a few examples. There's over 152 businesses in our directory, and we really encourage anyone to take a look and see what's happening out there, because it's really exciting and inspirational. Next slide, please. And then building on the success of that program is the Better Futures Plus program. I think Rupin has discussed this really, really well. We're helping 12 businesses in London measure their footprint and make a plan to reach net zero. The businesses have been selected from 4 sectors, and that's across film, the creative industries, food and hospitality. And we're showcasing these businesses as brilliant examples of businesses that have committed to reach net zero and the steps they are taking to achieve that. Each business has received a green innovation voucher worth £5,000, and that will help them gain bespoke sustainability consultancy and take part in a specially designed course which has been delivered by the Leonardo Centre at Imperial Business College over a 7-week period. And they're also working with the Climate Essentials tool, which we're about to hear about from Martina, which will help them measure their impacts so they can make a concrete plan to reduce their emissions. I think that is my cue to pass over to Martina to talk about that tool a little bit more.
Thank you, James. My name is Martina, and I work for Climate Community as a climate change engineer. I am back in the office today after 8 months, so I realized that my internet connection is not great, and it's also quite noisy outside, which, you know, when you work from home, you kind of forget about that. So apologies in advance if it gets a bit too noisy. So Climate Community is a small organization. We started operations nearly a year and a half ago. Our mission is to empower different stakeholders to measure and reduce their carbon emissions. There is often this discussion on who is responsible to reduce carbon emissions when it comes to global warming. Is it the government? Is it large corporations? Is it individuals? Is it businesses? And at Climate Community, we believe everyone can do their part, and every action helps, so we can catalyze climate action. What we have done to catalyze climate action is to create a tool called Climate Essentials. And if I share my screen, we can have access to it. So on Climate Essentials, we provide different stakeholders with an easy and engaging way of measuring and reducing their carbon emissions. So whether you're a household or a small and medium enterprises, you can go into the platform, you can complete a carbon calculator, you can get your carbon footprint, you can benchmark against peers, and then you can access our carbon reduction plan. Then we also provide a platform for local authorities, public and private bodies, where they can visualize and get data analytics of the carbon emissions of their ecosystem. As Matthew rightly said, for example, for this local authority, the carbon emissions of this organization only represent 3%, and the rest of the carbon emissions are coming from residents and businesses in their ecosystem. So Climate Essentials provides a way where they can visualize the rest of the emissions. With the Better Future Plus program, we are helping 12 businesses get their first carbon footprint and create a carbon reduction plan to help them reach net zero by 2030. So when a business goes into the platform, we're always going to ask them a few general questions so we can create a profile. And this profile is going to help us tailor the carbon questions a bit. So it's very relevant for their business sector. So let me just get that here. We are going to ask you, when do you want to create your baseline for your carbon emissions? 2020 was a particular year. And then you're going to see the estimate button quite a bit on our carbon calculator, because we know that some of this information may not be readily accessible for your business. We have divided the carbon calculation into 4 sectors that we believe contribute the most to an organization's carbon footprint. The first one is energy, and we're going to ask you about your electricity usage, electricity bills. You can type that in pounds or kilowatt hours. And again, if you don't have that information, we can always estimate them for you. This is the same logic for gas consumption in pounds, kilowatt hours. And again, if you don't know the answer to this question, we can estimate your gas consumption for you. Some business may procure the electricity and their gas from a green provider. So if you dig in here, then we can amend the carbon emissions accordingly. And then we ask you if you use other type of fuels in your business. We know this might be relevant depending on the business sector. So you can type the expenditure here, and we can calculate the carbon emissions for these different type of fuels. Then we move into the transport sectors, where simply we ask you about the type of vehicles, passenger vehicles and delivery vehicles your business owns. This is going to be diesel, petrol cars. You can type in the number of vehicles that you have and the total mileage, and then we can calculate the carbon emissions accordingly. Another option that you want to consider when you measure your organizational carbon footprint is employee commuting. Employee commuting goes into scope 3 emissions. These are indirect emissions. So not all business may want to measure that at this stage, but I think it's a good way to engage with your employees. And they are also a big sources of emissions, especially when we go back to normal and we start having employees commuting and employee flights. So again, you can select the numbers of employees that are commuting with different modes of transport, the total business flights that you had for 2020 in this case, and then we can measure the carbon footprint for indirect transport emissions. The second to last section that we need to look into when we calculate the business carbon emissions is products and services. Some may be a bit easy to calculate, for example, water usage in pounds if you have your bills, or cubic meters if you want to add a bit more accuracy. And again, if you don't have that information, Climate Essentials can estimate them for you. Some businesses may provide food and drinks for the employees, so that has an expenditure associated to it. So if you type that in and then you select the type of food that you have, we can calculate the carbon emissions of that as well. Obviously, when you select vegetarian or vegan, those emissions are going to go down quite substantially. And then we ask you about expenditures on some types of products, for example, electronics, stationery, and furniture that you may have bought for your business. Another option that we also need to take into account is home working emission, especially during the pandemic. We know that for some businesses, the employees have been working from home. And obviously, the emissions that were coming from the office, electric use and heating from the office have now moved to scope 3 indirect emissions from the employees' houses. So based on the numbers of hours, how many employees and how often they work from home, we can actually estimate the office equipment emissions. These are the laptops, routers, printers, and the heating and the cooling emissions. Then we have the options to add a bit more accuracy. So in this section, you may be able to put expenditure on marketing, accounting, legal, and pension services for your business. And we can estimate the carbon emissions of that as well. The idea of this screen is to try to give them a rough first impression of businesses when it comes to scope 3 and suppliers emissions. And lastly, we can also calculate the waste emissions that are coming from your business. We know that waste is very difficult to estimate. So again, we provide the estimation button. But if you want to add a bit more accuracy, you can go into our calculator. You can select the type of bins that you have in your business, how often in a week you empty that bin, and then we calculate the emissions for you. Once you have gone through our carbon calculator, you're going to access our dashboard, where you are going to be able to see the carbon footprint of your business and how it benchmarks against business working in the similar sector and similar size. We also provide a breakdown into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And this is particularly special if you want to start reporting your carbon emissions against the GHG protocol. Scope 1 are all the fuels that you use in your premises, for example, gas and diesel, or petrol for your vehicles. Scope 2 is going to be the electricity consumption and electricity for electric vehicles, if you have them in your business. And Scope 3 is going to be all that happens outside your business operations. That is going to be suppliers upstream, and then waste that is going downstream. And then also you have to take into account home working emissions and employee commuting. That is all going to Scope 3. Then we also provide an emission breakdown according to the carbon calculator, and how much our community, this is all the businesses that we have in Climate Essentials, have pledged to reduce, because we at Climate community, we believe that we need to take into account all the little steps that people and businesses take to make an impact on trying to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. On Climate Essentials, you're going to also be able to access your carbon reduction plan, divided into these 4 sectors. And we know that some businesses may have taken some steps to reduce their carbon emissions. So if your business have done some of these things already, you can tick them here, and then they are not going to appear later on the carbon reduction plan. Once you access your carbon reduction plan, you're going to see your original carbon footprint divided into these 4 sectors, and then how much this business have pledged to reduce. And you can keep track on your reductions on the right-hand side. So for example, if we go to transport reduction, you can see what happens to your emissions when you decide to electrify your passenger fleet, for example, or when you decide to implement cycle to work scheme for your employees. The carbon emissions from your transport sectors are going to start to come down. And this is the same for waste. If you want to reduce waste, we give you a few recommendations of how to do so for products and services, and then for energy. So for example, if we go to the energy reduction plan, you're going to see some options, for example, switch to LED lighting, install a small meter, switch to a renewable energy provider, and these recommendations are going to help you reduce your energy emissions. We are trying to get as many businesses as we can in the platform, and we're always looking for recommendations. So if you want to schedule a demo with us, or if you had ideas on how to improve Climate Essentials, please reach out to us. I'm going to type my email now on the chat, and that's it from my part. So thank you guys for having me today.
Martina, thank you so much for that whistle-stop tour of the Climate Essentials platform. Great to see how it's been developing over the past few months, and exciting that today, of course, we have one of the businesses with us who are piloting the use of the tool and helping you optimize its design. Now, I've, as always, got a few questions up my sleeve for the panel, but equally, if you want to put questions to each other, do make use of the chat window and help shape the last part of our conversation today. I'm going to bring Jane in, I think, first of all. We've obviously heard from Martina the sort of tool that is there for taking off the shelf to do that baseline assessment and start to plan your sort of carbon descent as an organisation. What's your take, Jane, on the amount of time that a business needs to set aside to go through that process and to start to get a grip on emissions?
Sure, thank you, Andrew. I would say the actual tool, using the tool it's fairly quick. It's an hour or so. It's just collating the data. So having an understanding of how much waste you produce or how much energy you use. And it's generally not so difficult to do if you can just look at your bills to see your energy usage and water usage, etc. I think it gets a little bit more difficult when you're getting into manufacturing and looking at your supply chains, because you need to engage with them. But just your overall business, it shouldn't take too long once you've got the information. Yep. So
scope 3, as always, where a lot of complexity can lie, and I suppose also it depends on an individual level how organised you are with your paperwork. Is it all in one place or filed away in your email inbox, or do you have to spend a lot of time tracking down those essential bits of data? But that doesn't sound too scary, at least to get started. One of the points I think sort of came through in Rupin's sort of reflections was that I suppose once you've taken out and chipped away at all the carbon you possibly can, at least for the time being, carbon offsets obviously start to come into play, and it's a pretty complicated market out there. I mean, we've ended up sort of joining an organisation sort of scheme called the Carbon Club. So by direct debit now every month we pay, I think, just under £200 across as our investment into sort of UK woodlands, that at some point, if we wanted, we could have a team outing to go and see the forests, the woodlands that we've been helping plant. But clearly those are difficult choices to make as to what type of offset you might want. I'm wondering, Martina, if you're still with us. I think you've been having some difficulties with your internet connection. Whether I can bring you in for some reflections on the offsetting choices, but perhaps whilst we're waiting for Martina, I don't know whether Jane or indeed Matthew, whether you've got sort of thoughts on the carbon offsetting piece, because equally I think it's a conversation happening in the public sector, as I understand it, Matthew.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. I suppose, I mean, carbon offsetting is sort of, my take on it is it's very much a last resort, and we haven't actively in Harrow considered it yet, because we don't think we've exhausted all of the opportunities we have to actually reduce our emissions. And I think it will get to that point where a little bit further down the line, when we've done the things we think we can do, we've got as far as we can with our buildings, we've electrified our fleets as far as we can, where we will have some residual emissions, because that's the nature of it. We're in a system, and the system isn't, as we all know, isn't carbon neutral or carbon net zero yet. That point we would consider some offsetting, and then the sort of options then about where you offset. There is a certain amount of offsetting in the borough you can do locally, because you can increase your tree planting and various things, so you can sequester carbon locally. But the reality in London is we just don't have enough land to do that. So I think most businesses would end up having to pay to schemes, in less populous parts of the UK or abroad, to offset that remaining carbon.
Is there potential in some of the sort of green finance that I suppose both local government might need for some of the sort of investments that are being considered, but equally local businesses, perhaps considering putting in air source heat pumps, solar panels, etc.? Could those in themselves be carbon offset projects that sort of perhaps drive some circularity of investment?
Yeah, I think there is in principle some suggestions around that there could be. I mean, obviously doing things as local as possible is the preferable solution, and if you have something like that, that's a win-win, because it encourages your green economy as well, and you skill up people who are into renewable technologies, then yes, that's certainly something that could be considered. So it's not just natural solutions to sequester carbon. Doing things outside your organisation, but maybe close to your area, so you're still benefiting from them, that help with the emissions agenda is also a good option. Yeah.
Jane, any additional thoughts on this offset question?
Sure. I think I'd have to mirror what Matthew was saying, that it is the last thing you do once you've tried to reduce as much and change to renewable energy and everything you can do in your business to reduce, and then you offset as a last resort. And if you are going down the offset route, I'd say make sure it's verified by a third-party auditing company, just to make sure that they are definitely offsetting and saying that they're doing what they say on the tin. There's plenty of offsetting around the world. In the UK, some wonderful companies. I know of one where they look at saving key species. So, for example, elephants in Africa, which actually eat the seeds off trees, deposit them as they walk around, and then trees grow on their own. So they're saving a species, they're planting trees, and they're helping the entire ecosystem, and they employ local people to do that. So it has a social impact as well. So obviously wonderful programs out there, and just to say that make sure that it's verified by a third party if that's the route you go down.
Thank you. I've put in the chat window a link to West London Business's sort of scheme that we're investing in, and folk can keep track of how many tons we've currently offset on that webpage. And I was just going to say that if Martina was still with us, she'd be pointing us, I'm sure, to this Oxford report from last year. But Martina is back, so I wonder whether you want to say a few words on carbon offsetting and how that report can kind of help us navigate the different choices.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Internet is not working with me today. Yeah, so I think, the question is how you select the carbon offsets. And obviously you need to take into account that the carbon offsets need to be real, needs to be additional, needs to be measurable, and needs to be, sorry, I'm missing one. But you need to take into account that the project is actually removing or avoiding carbon emissions, and it needs to be verified by auditor, a third-party auditor. There are a few that do that for you, for example, the gold standard, and you can actually go into the website and you can see the type of projects that they have verified. Once you have checked that the carbon audit or the carbon credit that you want to buy is real and has been verified, then there are a few ways you can go about it. One is price. There are a lot of volatility when it comes to price. And there was a report that was published, I think, 2 days ago, that the prices are actually quite low right now. So if you want to buy carbon credits, now is the time to do so. They are expecting to go very, very high in the next few years because of the gap between supply and demand. They are going to go as high as £50 a ton. So please buy carbon credits now if you want to reduce your carbon emissions from your businesses. Obviously, one is price, one is the type of projects. There are a variety of projects: reforestation, solar panels, wind, biogas, cleaner stoves. So it depends on what your business wants to support. And also you have location. You may want to support offsets in the UK, or you may want to support projects in different locations, for example, Africa, Latin America, or even Asia. So that is also depends on what your business chooses to support and what type of project they want to support by buying carbon credits.
Fantastic. So thank you for that summary, and for any that I've put the link into that Oxford report in the chat so folk can drill down into more detail should they want it. Now I'm gonna bring Rupin sort of back into the conversation, but also Matthew around this question of flexible packaging, and whether there are plans sort of locally to increase the amount of flexible plastic collection and recycling. I think Rupin have observed that in London Borough of Hillingdon, so one of our 7 northwest London boroughs, plastic bags are featuring within the curbside recycling, which is better than some boroughs, but that doesn't seem to be a full collection of flexible plastic sort of in its broadest sense. Where's your sense, Matthew, of where the conversation is at the moment?
I mean, it's a good question, Andrew. It's one I'm not sure personally we've considered it. So I think it's definitely an area, and perhaps Rupin, we can have touch base after this meeting to see what opportunity there is. And obviously West London's disposal happens as a group, which is an advantage actually, because we will work under West London Waste Authority. So if we're doing something, then we're obviously in touch with them, and I think there's probably an opportunity there to say, well, how can we create the options for people to be able to dispose of their waste and make sure that it's done in a responsible manner, if that isn't already happening. So I don't have an immediate answer, but it's definitely something.
No, I think you're right. There's a conversation to be had with the West London Waste Authority, and my sense is that as a fast-moving sort of market, it is quite difficult to keep track of the infrastructure that's emerging at quite a pace for different waste streams. And then, of course, when it does become available, it can get swallowed up by several hundred other local authorities all trying to access that capacity. So you have to move quickly. Rupin, you mentioned some companies I think earlier on that you are seeing coming into the space. What's your sense of If you had to guess, how many years will it be until all of the UK's flexible plastics can be recycled?
So right now, the biggest initiative is being taken by Tesco. So earlier, what used to happen was all supermarkets used to have a silo for flexible packaging, which is only polyethylene, which is the most widely used. So in your fruit bags, bread bags, and a lot of other food products which are perishable and short lifespans, they all come in polyethylene pouches, bags rather than clear bags. But somehow all the supermarkets seem to have pulled out of it. Now, I think last year at some point, Tesco signed up with Loop for a lot of recyclables to be collected on site at their stores. So what they've now launched is, since around last autumn, is a silo for flexible packaging, regardless of what format of packaging it is, whether it's a protein powder pouch or a pet food pouch or your humble bread bag. You can just roll it all up and put it in the flexible packaging silo. It is normally at larger format silos. So they are leading it. So they did a trial last year and they were expecting around a period they tried. I think they were expecting something around 10-12 tons and they got something like 35 tons. So it is something that is there. But then who will segregate it in their house and make it a point to go and deposit at a facility? Now, the biggest change, I've spoken to a few local authorities last year also while I was working with them. So if you have a cardboard collection point at your local recycling center, why can't you have a silo that Tesco can have? So that is another challenge because they are out in the open. They presented their challenges, obviously, but that thought process is still not there. Flexible packaging is not under anybody's radar. Even if you look at the plastic pack, which RAP is getting involved, all the multinational companies who generate so much packaging waste, there is no clear sort of route forward. That is the frustration.
Yeah, no, certainly when I reflect on my own household's sort of waste and what we're sort of left with going into a black sack and not going into sort of recycle bins, clearly flexible packaging is a big chunk of what's left, and it's quite bulky as well, which brings with it its own challenge.
The weight is nothing, but if you see your black bin will be 90% wrappers. So that is the type of challenge we face. That is the biggest problem because the weight, the volume doesn't transcend into weight, so it becomes uneconomical to convert. Basically, that's the problem.
And have you got a sense from the schemes that are currently being piloted? What's the sort of next use and sort of stage of life of these flexible plastics once they've been processed? What can they become?
So the one we work with right now is a UK-based company who do all the recycling in the UK at their site in Cambridgeshire. They're called NVAL. So they use a microwave pyrolysis technique. So any kind of packaging, whether it has any kind of polymers, complex structure, it has aluminium in it, everything goes in a sort of a oven and gets burned in the absence of oxygen. So, and that itself, the gases generated run the plant, as it were. It is a closed loop. It generates the power as well as at the end point there is a generation of mineral oils, which they sell it to people who produce virgin plastics. Now, whatever the other part is, the aluminium that comes out in a lot of pouch and packaging structures, there is still aluminium, very thin layer. Aluminium becomes a commodity which they can sell on, and that is their revenue stream, basically. And although they claim it is completely carbon neutral, I have picked up a few holes, but I'm working on them, and we'll hopefully find out, we'll have some more clarity. But it is much better than not doing anything.
Absolutely, because at the moment it will either end up in landfill or probably being incinerated in an energy from waste plant, which is a long way from being ideal. Goodness, it's been a fascinating conversation with you all, as always. It's been a memorable stop, our Harrow stop on our tour of Northwest London. Just to remind you that if you want to get more information and support from West London Business on this journey, go to westlondon.com/race to zero. And please email my colleague barney.close@westlondon.com if you'd like any other sort of signposting advice, or indeed you'd like the Excel carbon calculator sent over to you as a starting point. So all that's left for me to do is to say a huge thank you to our panel this morning and wish you all a great day. Thank you.